I'm going to make a new layer above it, and I'll call it gradient mesh drawing. And I'm just going to go ahead and start to trace around the bottle. And by now I'm sure you guys know that I only have to draw half of this bottle because I can just duplicate the profile and reflect it and get the same exact shape on both sides. Alright, so I drew out my bottle, but while I was working on it, some of my points got shifted around. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my direct selection tool and hold down Command so I can just select a few points, and then I'm just going to move those points back up to where I need them to be. So as long as I select points directly, I can move a bunch of them at one time instead of having to go back and move each one individually. Also, to make sure my first point and my last point are on the same axis, I'm going to hold down Command so I get my direct selection tool and hold down Shift so I select those 2 points. And then I still get these align tools up at the top. So I'm going to choose Align Horizontal Center, and it'll shift those points so that they're on the same horizontal axis. And I can do the same with the vertical axis and so on. But I'm doing that so that when I flip this image around, those 2 points are on the same line basically, and it'll be easier to line the two separate vector paths up. Hold on, let me change the color of this line. So I used the direct selection tool, and I selected the very first point and then hold down Shift so I can select more than one point. Select the very bottom one. And then just like you can align objects when you select more than one, I can align points to one another. So I did horizontal align center. It's probably easier to see if it was more dramatic. So like if this point is over here and this point is here, and I did, let's see, I'll do horizontal align right. It shifts those points to be in line with one another. So now I'm going to duplicate this shape, the double arrows, and I'm going to go over to my transform menu, and I'm going to go to flip horizontal. It just flips that shape the other way. And I'm going to bring the 2 sides together. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off this initial layer because I don't need that anymore. right now they're two separate shapes, and what I'm going to do, because I need to preserve one half of it to show you guys how to do the 3D rendering in Illustrator, I'm actually going to duplicate this first half and just set it aside. But what I also need to do, I need to make this shape into one solid shape in order to make a gradient mesh. So for this, I'm going to bring these two sides together, and let's see, if I have Smart Guides on, it should just kind of click into place. Once again, I'm going to take my direct selection tool of these two vector shapes, and then I'm going to do Option Shift J, where is it? Option Command J, and get average. Now, since I've already aligned everything, I shouldn't have to average, but I like to do this just to make sure the points line up. So I'm going to click OK, and then I'm going to do Command J to join those 2 points. So now if I were to take that point and move it, I can see that those 2 points are together. And I'll do the same thing at the bottom here. So I'll average them and then Command J to join them. And once I've joined them, then I can go back with the pen tool and maybe smooth out the anchor points a little bit. And if I hold down Shift while I'm moving the anchor points, it keeps the handlebars even on each side, so everything stays very symmetrical. So now I've got my silhouette of the bottle. Ta-da! From here, I'm going to use the Gradient Mesh tool. And that's actually a tool over here with your main toolbars. It looks like a rectangle with a bunch of squiggly lines in it. So I'm going to click on it, and at first it's not really going to do anything. I have to make sure that my object is selected, and then I have to roll over some part of the path, and then the arrow will change. So you'll see when I'm not over the object, it's got a circle with the line through it. When I roll over the path, the arrow changes, and so obviously I can actually use it for this object. So I'm going to click, and I can go in and start adding different, basically this is making different grid lines along inside my path. Let's see, there should actually be another way. I think if you double click, you should be able to just edit it beforehand. Hold on. Okay. Well, so as I go in here, I can start adding these lines one by one. And what I would recommend doing is having some type of grid line that goes directly down the center of the bottle, and then try to be as symmetrical as you can with the other placements of the points. And you can add them vertically and horizontally. Now the caveat I have, Illustrator just kind of assumes it knows where it's going to put stuff. So as you see towards the bottom of the bottle here, the lines aren't straight anymore. What I can do when I have the mesh tool selected, if I hold down Command, I can get the last selection tool I had and select each point individually and start to move them around. And what you'll notice is each point has its own handlebars, so you can move around the curves and everything just like you would with any other path. Yeah. Be your best friend, because as you move stuff up and down or left or right, the shift key will keep things aligned across certain axes. Alright, so I think this is enough to start. Then what I can do is I can start filling this in with color. So I'm going to have my bottle start off as red. And I'm going to start adding in color at each of these points to mimic the light and the reflection and shadowing of the bottle and perhaps the liquid inside of it. Let's see, do I have one of these with the label off? Yeah. So it might help to take the bottle and take the label off so I can actually see what the bottle looks like. But I'm going to assume that maybe these points on the left side are where the lighter parts are. So I might fill those in. And what I'm doing here is I'm just taking the direct selection tool and I'm selecting specific points along the mesh. And what you're going to do is just think of this as drawing with a pastel, with some pastels or with paint. You're putting color in certain areas to help define the shape. So maybe there's some more light here at the top. And maybe on this side over here, it's shaded, so I'm going to hold down Shift and select a bunch of points along and make this color a bit darker. And maybe that shading extends over into this side of the bottle a little bit more. So I just would continue on like this and start to render the bottle so that it becomes a bit more dimensional. You can start to see how that comes together. The example up here shows the same bottle, just more defined. Same sort of thing. I looked at areas where the light was reflected. Helps define the shape of the bottle, but also will help me figure out places where the label could go over, places that curve a little bit more, so on and so forth. So this is one approach to rendering your bottle in a three-dimensional fashion. The other way is to use the actual 3D option in Illustrator. So for this one, I've got my original path here, and I always duplicate stuff. Like I'll have 15 of these bottle halves by the time I'm done. And I'm just going to go ahead and make this a color, make it blue. Whoops. Okay. If you go to the effects menu, you've got this 3D option. And the one you want to use, I believe, is to revolve. So if you click on it, you get this box that comes up, and you're going to want to click preview. And so from here, it'll show you what it'll look like to take this half and turn it 180 degrees. With this, you have to make sure if you have a stroke on it, it's going to make the bottle the color of the stroke, because obviously that would be, it'd be like taking a piece of cake and you've got the icing on the outside. So obviously if you rotate that piece of cake 180 degrees, all you're going to see is the icing and not the cake inside. So keep that in mind as you're working with the color for this. But you can play with the rotation of it and turn it different ways. You can also play with the surface. If you do a wireframe, it breaks it down into the actual axes and curves on the bottle. You can tell it not to do any shading, which would just be a silhouette, so I don't know why you'd do that. Plastic shading is the one where it's basically a matte surface with the highlighting and shading that you would typically use. Keep in mind that as you're working with this feature, it takes a lot more data from the application. So if you do this for a lot of different shapes, it's going to slow down the program. And we all know what happens when it slows down the program. It's more likely to crash. So I wouldn't go and put like a dozen of these bottles into one document and work on it at one time. Maybe do this for one or two, and that'll be that. But this object remains as it is. It'll show up three-dimensionally. You can always go back and change the options. Like if you go to the appearance menu over here on the right, it'll show that you have a 3D revolve effect. So you can always click on it and edit what it looks like. You can also turn the effect off, and this is true for any type of effect you put on a vector object. If you go to the appearance panel, if there's an eyeball next to it, that means that that appearance is showing up on your screen. So to turn it off, you just click on the eyeball and it takes that effect away. But the purpose of you guys doing this is so you can start to think about how your labels might work on your bottles inside of Illustrator. So what I can do once I know what the bottle will look like and I have kind of a 3D rendering of it, I can, let's see, I'll make a new layer for my labels. And I'll lock those so I can't mess with them. And I can take my pen tool and start to draw some label shapes on here. What the heck is going on? There we go. So I can figure out what shape I want. I can maybe decide to do a circular shape. Maybe I want to do something cool on the top here. So more or less it's giving me a blueprint to work with. We'll talk about on Friday how you would take your bottle and go from the labels in Illustrator to figure out how you would make actual paper dummies for the bottle. So then you know the sizing, the curves, all that kind of stuff before you go and start putting your artwork inside. Are there any questions about the either the gradient mesh tool or the 3D tool? And you can use the 3D tool for boxes and other stuff. It's just you would use probably one of the other options because you've also got extrude and bevel, rotate, etc., etc. But Revolve would be the one you'd want to use for these bottles. Let's see. There are a couple other things that I wanted to show you guys that I didn't get to talk to you guys about on Friday. So we've already talked a lot about color palettes, and I think after the last project, you guys probably have a pretty good understanding about choosing colors and the importance of having a group of colors that work well together. Well, there's also some tools that you can use to help you figure out the transitioning between two different colors, or even using transitions between two different types of shapes. So let's say I've got one box that is red and another box down here that's like an orangey gold color. There is a tool called the blend tool. It's over here on the left hand side. It has a square and then a circle underneath it. And what I'll do is I'll select my two shapes and I'll start with one of the shapes, click on the first shape and then click on the second shape. And it essentially blends the two shapes together. So if I want to actually break this apart and be able to get the individual shapes between this transition, just like everything else, I'll go to Object and Expand, and it'll break this apart into hundreds of little squares. And each one represents a place in this transition between the two colors. So especially if you've got two colors that you want to use, but you also want to have access to all the colors in between, this is a good way to kind of help you build a palette manually between those two colors. But this tool can also help you develop transitions between two different shapes. So let's say, actually, on one end I've got the pentagon, and then on the other end I've got a star. Now if I double click over here on the blend tool, I can choose different options. So the first one was smooth color, so it just made a big long line between the two shapes. This time I want to have a certain amount of steps between these two shapes. So between the pentagon and the star, I want to have 5 steps of transition. So I'm going to press OK. I'm going to click between those two shapes, and it'll automatically make transitional shapes between the two. As long as they're grouped together like this, I can't kind of shapes around. So once again, to break them apart, I'm going to go to expand. I'm also going to ungroup them. So now I have access to them as individual shapes. Alright, so now let's say I've got, I'm going to put these all to the side. Let's say I've got these two shapes again, but I've got this pentagon with a certain type of stroke around it. Let's see. And I've also got a gradient inside of it. And I want to apply that to this star shape. That's where the eyedropper tool will come in. So I just select whatever object I want to put the new appearance into, take the eyedropper tool, roll over the objects that I want to grab the appearance from, and click, and it automatically takes that and puts it into the new shape. And I could do that with a ton of different shapes. Let's say I've got all of these weird star shapes. I could select all of those and click with the eyedropper tool, and it puts that appearance into the selected objects. Now it does work the other way around. So if you hold down Option and click onto another object that isn't selected, it'll take the appearance of the selected object and put it into the new one. Now one other thing that you can do if you've got a bunch of stuff on your artboard and you want to edit it, but you don't want to have to go through and hold down Shift and select all 15 of them at once, what you can do, make sure that whatever color or appearance you want to select is chosen down here. And one way to do that would be to just use your eyedropper tool and click once on whatever object that has the appearance you want to select in it. And then go up to Select, go down to Same. If you choose Same Appearance, that means you'll choose all the objects that have this orange fill and no stroke. So it'll select everything on my artboard with those attributes. Now let's say that these have a different stroke color on them. If I go to select Same Appearance now, it's only going to select that one object because that's the only one that holds those attributes. If I go to select same fill, now it will choose the weird star shapes because it's ignoring the stroke and just focusing on the fill. So you have a lot of different options for things to choose here. You could just focus on the opacity, like if you've got 15 different colors but they are all at 10% opacity, you could choose the opacity and it would choose all of those items even though they're different colors, and so on and so forth. So this is a really good way to be able to select stuff without having to go through and click things individually. All right, so are there any questions about any of these tools? Does that all make sense? Okay.